Karen called the 911 when I closed my driveway, but she had no idea what I found. Have you ever had a nosy neighbor who can't mind their own business? When I started fixing my driveway, Karen from down the street called the police on me. But while digging, I found a metal box with secrets that could destroy her perfect life forever. Before watching full video, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more videos. The morning I decided to finally fix that crumbling section of my driveway was the same morning I discovered how thin the veneer of neighborhood civility really was. I'd lived in Oakwood Estates for nearly 7 years, quietly minding my business while the suburban drama swirled around me like autumn leaves in a cul-de-sac. I wasn't the type to get involved in homeowners association squabbles or lawn comparison contests. I kept my grass cut, my mailbox painted, and my opinions to myself. That changed on an unusually warm Saturday in April when I woke up early, determined to tackle the growing pothole at the edge of my property. What started as a minor annoyance had morphed into a small crater, and several neighbors had already made passive-aggressive comments about it being a real eyesore and potentially damaging to their vehicles. Fair enough. It was time to handle it. I pulled on my work clothes, had a quick breakfast, and headed to the garage to gather my tools. By 7:30 a.m., I had set up traffic cones around the damaged section and was measuring the area to calculate how much concrete I'd need. The plan was simple: close off half my driveway for the weekend, dig out the damaged section, pour new concrete, and be done with it before Monday morning. Nothing complicated, nothing that should bother anyone. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of a throat being forcefully cleared behind me. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned to find Janice Wilcox standing at the edge of my property line, arms crossed, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the early hour. Janice had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years ago and had quickly established herself as the self-appointed watchdog of Oakwood Estates. Her house was 3 doors down, which should have put me safely outside her regular patrol zone, but apparently not. "Good morning, Janice," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Just fixing this pothole finally. Should be done by tomorrow evening." She pursed her lips, the corners of her mouth turning down as if I'd just confessed to planning a midnight rave. "You can't just block access like this. It's inconsiderate to the rest of us." I glanced at my driveway in confusion. "I'm only blocking my own property and just half of it. My car's parked on the street, so I won't be blocking anyone." "This is a violation," she insisted, pulling out her phone. "You need proper permits for construction work. And the noise ordinance clearly states no work before 8 a.m. on weekends." I checked my watch, 7:42 a.m. I haven't even started the noisy part yet, and this isn't construction. It's basic maintenance. But Janice was already tapping away at her phone, her acrylic nails clicking against the screen with military precision. "I'm documenting this. The HOA will be hearing about it." I shrugged and turned back to my measuring. Janice had already reported 3 different neighbors for holiday decorations that remained up 2 days too long, another for a basketball hoop that was apparently 3 inches too close to the sidewalk, and famously called a landscaping company to complain about their truck being parked on the street for, as she put it, an excessive duration while they worked on the Henderson's yard. I figured I could weather whatever storm she was brewing. What I didn't expect was the police cruiser that rolled up 20 minutes later. Officer Reyes stepped out, looking slightly embarrassed. I knew him casually, our kids had played in the same little league a few years back. He approached with an apologetic smile. "Hey Mark. Got a call about an illegal road blockage." I gestured to my completely open street and the half-blocked private driveway. "Seriously?" He sighed. "Yeah, dispatch said the caller was insistent. Said you were creating a public hazard and refusing to move when asked." He glanced around. Obviously that's not what's happening here, but I still had to check it out. From the corner of my eye, I could see Janice watching from her front porch, phone still in hand, practically vibrating with the self-righteousness of someone who believes they've caught a dangerous criminal in the act. "Sorry about this," Officer Reyes said quietly. "Between us, we get at least 3 calls a week from this neighborhood, and it's almost always—" "Let me guess," I said. "Janice Wilcox." He maintained his professional composure, but the slight roll of his eyes told me everything. "I can't comment on specific callers, but let's just say some people have a lower threshold for what constitutes an emergency than others." He made a show of checking my work area, asked if I had considered putting a notice in neighbors' mailboxes about the temporary disruption, a good suggestion actually, and then left with a friendly warning to be careful with my back while lifting concrete bags. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. By noon I had removed the damaged concrete, dug out the soft soil beneath, and was preparing the subbase with gravel. The temperature had climbed into the high 70s, and I had stripped down to a t-shirt, working steadily and making good progress. That's when I noticed something unusual in the soil I was removing. At first, I thought it was just an old piece of metal, perhaps a part from a car that had broken off during an unfortunate encounter with the previous pothole. But as I brushed away the dirt, I realized I was looking at something else entirely, a small metal box roughly the size of a thick hardcover book. Curious, I pulled it free from the earth. It was surprisingly heavy, made of what appeared to be steel, with a simple latch mechanism that had been sealed shut by years of rust and dirt. There were no markings, no obvious clues about its origin or purpose. It had been buried at least 2 feet down, well below the original concrete. I was contemplating whether to open it now or finish my work first when a familiar voice shattered my concentration. Is that city property you're digging up? Because removal of municipal infrastructure is a felony. Janice had returned, this time with reinforcements, 2 other women from the neighborhood who served on the HOA board with her. Martha Jenkins and Diane Foster stood slightly behind Janice, clearly uncomfortable about being dragged into the confrontation but too intimidated by Janice to resist. I quickly set the box down beside my tools and stood up. Janice, this is my property line. I'm fixing my own driveway which connects to a public road. I'm not digging up city property. We'll see about that, she sniffed, making a show of taking photos with her phone. The property boundaries in these subdivisions are very precise, and I've already contacted the city surveyor. Martha at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Janice, I really don't think. The rules exist for a reason. Janice cut her off. And what's that? She pointed at the metal box. Are you removing things from the ground without a permit? Because there could be utility lines. I called 811 before digging, I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. The utilities are marked. This was just something buried in my driveway. Diane peered at the box. What is it? I don't know yet, I admitted. I just found it. That was a mistake. Janice's eyes lit up like I'd just handed her pure gold. An unknown object buried on property boundaries? This could be historically significant. We need to call the Historical Society. She was already dialing another number on her phone. Janice, I said firmly, I appreciate your concern, but this is still my property and that's still my driveway. I'm going to finish my repairs and then I'll examine what I found. And destroy potential historical artifacts in the process? She was practically sputtering now. I won't stand by, Anne. The sound of another vehicle pulling up interrupted her tirade. It was Officer Reyes again, looking considerably less patient than he had earlier. Ma'am, he said, addressing Janice directly this time, we've discussed the appropriate use of emergency services before. I called the non-emergency line this time, she countered, chin raised defiantly. For a man fixing his own driveway, Officer Reyes observed drily. He turned to me. Everything's still all right here, Mark? I nodded. Just trying to finish this project. Found something interesting buried in the driveway, but it's probably nothing. Officer Reyes glanced at the box, then at the 3 women standing at the edge of my property. Ladies, unless you have permission to be on Mr. Chen's property, I suggest you return to your own homes. Martha and Diane immediately began backing away, murmuring apologies. Janice stood her ground for a moment longer before reluctantly following them, but not before announcing loudly, "This isn't over. There are proper channels for these situations." After they left, Officer Reyes shook his head. "Sorry about that. Again. Not your fault," I assured him. "Thanks for showing up." He gestured to the box. "Anything interesting?" "No idea. Just found it while digging." He nodded. "Well, unless it's obviously dangerous or illegal, it's yours to deal with. Let me know if you need anything else." With that, he returned to his cruiser and left, probably hoping he wouldn't have to return to Oakwood Estates for at least the rest of the day. I went back to work, but my curiosity about the box kept distracting me. Finally, after laying the gravel subbase, I decided to take a break and examine my find. Using a screwdriver and some WD-40, I managed to work the rusted latch loose enough to pry it open. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oilcloth that had mostly disintegrated over time, were several bundles of documents. The paper was yellowed and brittle but surprisingly intact. As I carefully unfolded the top sheet, I realized I was looking at a property deed, dated 1923. Fascinated, I delicately sifted through the contents. There were more property documents, what appeared to be old photographs and several letters, all related to the original development of what would eventually become Oakwood Estates. According to these papers, the land had once belonged to a family named Callaway, who had operated a successful orchard here before selling to developers in the late 1950s. But there was something else, a sealed envelope marked confidential, in faded red ink, addressed to someone named Thomas Wilcox. Wilcox. The same surname as Janice. I stared at the envelope, debating whether to open it. On one hand, it wasn't addressed to me. On the other, it was buried on my property and was at least 60 years old. After a moment's hesitation, my curiosity won out. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a contract, dated 1958. As I read it, my eyebrows climbed higher and higher. According to this document, Thomas Wilcox, presumably Janice's father or grandfather, had been one of the original developers of Oakwood Estates. But the contract detailed something far more interesting, an agreement to hide certain facts about the land's history during development. Specifically, the document acknowledged that a portion of the development, including the section where Janice's house now stood, had once been the site of the Callaway family cemetery. The developers had agreed to relocate the graves to the municipal cemetery but failed to move 3 of them due to time constraints and budget concerns. The contract explicitly stated that these facts were to be suppressed to avoid affecting property values. I sat back on my heels, stunned. If this was legitimate, Janice Wilcox's pristine, obsessively maintained property was sitting atop 3 forgotten graves, and her own ancestor had knowingly built over them and concealed the truth. I was still processing this revelation when a shadow fell across the papers in my hands. I looked up to find Janice standing at the edge of my driveway again, alone this time. "I want to apologize," she said stiffly, clearly reciting words she had reluctantly rehearsed. "Officer Reyes suggested I may have overreacted." I carefully folded the contract and placed it back in the envelope. "Apology accepted," I said neutrally. Her eyes fixed on the documents spread around me. "What are those?" "Historical records about Oakwood Estates," I replied honestly, "including some interesting information about your house." Her expression shifted from forced contrition to genuine interest. "My house? What about it?" I hesitated. I could use this information to put Janice in her place once and for all, to give her a taste of the discomfort she so frequently inflicted on others. The thought was tempting, especially after a day of her interference. But looking at her, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, the desperate need to control her surroundings, to impose order on a world that often made little sense. Behind her perfectly coiffed exterior and aggressive rule enforcement was someone who feared chaos, who needed stability so badly she was willing to alienate everyone around her to maintain it. "These documents show that your house sits on what was once the most fertile part of the old Callaway orchard," I said instead, setting aside the envelope with the cemetery information. "Apparently they grew prize-winning apples right where your living room is now." "Really?" For the first time since I'd known her, Janice looked genuinely delighted rather than suspicious. "My property has historical significance?" I nodded. "According to these records, yes." She stepped closer, peering at the documents with newfound respect. Would it be possible for me to see those sometime?" "For the Neighborhood Historical Committee, of course." I hadn't been aware that Oakwood Estates had a historical committee, but I suspected one would be formed by tomorrow morning. "Sure," I said. "Once I've had a chance to go through everything properly. There's a lot here about the original development." Janice straightened, already shifting into organizational mode. "We should preserve these. The HOA could fund proper archival storage, perhaps even a display in the community center." "That's not a bad idea," I admitted. She glanced at my half-finished driveway repair. "Do you need any help?" "My husband has some experience with concrete work." I blinked in surprise. "That would actually be great. Thanks." She nodded and took a step back. "I'll send him over." "And?" She hesitated, clearly struggling to form the words. "I may have been overzealous earlier. About the permits and timing." "Water under the bridge," I assured her. As she walked away, I looked down at the envelope containing the cemetery information. Some truths served no purpose except to hurt. The past couldn't be changed, and revealing this particular secret would only destroy Janice's sense of security in her own home. Whatever her faults, nobody deserved that. I carefully placed the envelope at the bottom of the box, beneath the other documents, and closed the lid. There were better ways to build community than by tearing down someone's foundation. True to her word, Janice's husband Tom came over 30 minutes later, bringing with him an expensive concrete mixing drill attachment I'd been eyeing at the hardware store but couldn't justify purchasing for a one-time job. He was surprisingly pleasant company, sharing stories about his own home improvement disasters while we worked. By Sunday evening, the concrete was poured and setting nicely. I'd managed to sort through most of the documents from the box, setting aside those that might interest the neighborhood: orchard records, original architectural drawings, old photographs, while keeping the cemetery contract secure. The following weekend, Oakwood Estates held its first historical society meeting in the community center. Janice presided, of course, proudly displaying the historical artifacts I'd agreed to donate. The event brought together neighbors who had previously only interacted through complaints and HOA violation notices. People shared stories about their homes, discovered connections to the original families, and even began planning an annual Callaway Apple Festival. As for Janice, she still patrolled the neighborhood and still cited HOA regulations with religious fervor. But something had shifted. Perhaps having a project that created connection rather than division had shown her another way to channel her organizational energy. Or maybe she simply appreciated that I'd given her something positive to focus on. The metal box sits on my bookshelf now, containing only one document: the cemetery contract. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice in keeping it secret. But then I see Janice leading historical walking tours of the neighborhood or organizing community events, and I think that perhaps some foundations are better left undisturbed. The pothole that started it all has been fixed for months now, but it opened something more valuable than it damaged. A reminder that beneath our driveways and property lines, we all share the same ground, built on histories both known and hidden. And sometimes, the most neighborly thing you can do is to know when to dig deep, and when to pave over the past and build something new together instead.